Liberation of Intellect. He gave this in 1983, I believe. And the teachings that he gave in these discourses will be relevant and useful and important for human society for a long time to come. There may be problems in the future which we cannot imagine now. Or alternatively, if neo-humanism and other aspects of our ideology become well known, it may be that in 100 years or a few hundred years, people look back to 2022 and they say, those silly people, didn't they know that they had the solutions to these problems? Why were they not using Anandamurti or P.R. Sarkar's teachings to solve their problems? I hope that's how they look back on us. And I hope that in the near future and the far future that what we see now as terrible problems will be solved for the benefit of human society, for the benefit of all beings. Now, let me start in a slightly different point. That was just a general thought that came to my mind. Baba's teachings are, of course, not just for philosophy students or philosophy professors. One, they are something that if we understand them, as I say, we can help the human society immeasurably if we can understand and put into action what Baba has given us. One can, of course, memorize what Baba wrote. And there are people with good memories who can perhaps memorize a whole book or at least the essence of Baba's books. But to memorize Baba's teaching is not necessarily what will solve all the problems. Just because you have them committed to memory will not, as I say, solve all the problems. A story, a small story I recall from here in London. We live in London, our Jagrati is in a very international neighborhood. We have people from so many backgrounds, so many languages, so many religions in this small neighborhood. And I have a friend here, a man I know, he's known Anandamaga for many years. He's from Bangladesh, he's Muslim. He's lived in London for 50 years or more, I guess. He's retired now. And I often see him, he says, hello, Dada, how are you? And we talk for a few minutes. And a couple of years ago or whatever, I was outside near the Jagrati and he came up and his two grandsons were with him. His grandsons, I would guess they're in their late teens or early 20s, tall, young, healthy, good-looking men. And he told me proudly that his two grandsons had memorized the whole Quran. Now, in one sense, that's very impressive. I could hardly memorize a page of any book, and now I'm in my older years. Although when I was younger, I could memorize things. And I said to him, oh, yes, that's quite nice. But what I did not say to him was that, yes, they have memorized the Quran. That's great. But what do they understand about the Quran? And when I say, what do they understand about the Quran? I said that to myself. I did not say it to my friend. I could also say that about anyone who has memorized any good book, any spiritual book. Yes, you have memorized it, but can you understand and practice what that teacher, a prophet, a guru, a messiah, whoever it is, can you understand what they've said and can you put it into action? And I think we all remember what Baba said. He says that educated is he or she who has learned much, remembered much, and put it into action. So as I'm saying, the memorizing of something is not important, although it's nice if you can do that, but what can you do about those teachings? How can you help the human society through the spiritual teachings that you have? And of course, everything that Baba wrote is practical. It's things that can help us understand the world better and make the world a better place. So some of Baba's ideas, of course, can be quite complex, but all of them are meant to help us move forward in both our personal lives and in our social life, and of course, in our spiritual lives. The talk I want to give now, this brief explanation, the time I'll take is dealing with Discourse 9 of Liberation of Intellect, which, appropriate to the modern world, is called Awakened Conscience. Earlier in the day, I sent the discourse on the French WhatsApp group, so perhaps you've had time to look at it if you hadn't read it lately. The idea that I understand is that with awakened conscience, we can solve all problems. I'm not going to go into a detail of every line and every paragraph in the discourse, and I've got a few more minutes, a few more thoughts on introducing this topic. But if we can put into action, using the quote that I just said from Baba, his viewpoint, his views on awakened conscience, then I think that we could have heaven on earth. It won't happen tomorrow, it won't happen overnight, but Baba's teachings will give us a heaven on earth, if any teachings can do that. I'm going to speak, of course, in a simple way, not talking in a deep intellectual way. I'm going to talk in a broad or general way about some of these points in the short time that we have here. But first, I want to add something that I was thinking about lately. I've actually often thought about this. I see that Baba's overall philosophy, his spiritual philosophy and his social philosophy, plus perhaps including his teachings such as in yogic treatments and charya, etc. I see them. I see that Baba's philosophy, in a very general way, can be put into two categories. First are those teachings of Baba's that I would say that he has remodeled from earlier ideas for the present humanity. This can, for example, include Baba's teachings on yoga, on tantra, and on Jama Niyama, for example. We know that tantra has been around for a long time. Shiva gave the essence of tantra about 7,000 years ago. But tantra, as with some of the other teachings that Baba has been misinterpreted over years, over many centuries. Perhaps the ideas have even been abused. Certainly they have been misunderstood. And so Baba needed to, for some of Baba's teachings, he needed to give it to the modern world and re-explain the teachings so that we can understand them. Tantra, for example, I'd say in recent times, if I asked anyone who's read about Tantra, they may say, oh, this is for yogis who live in the forest or the caves or the ashrams, but it's not for the common people today. Of course, Shiva did give it for the regular people because, as I understand from our teachings, the Vedas were too difficult and too far away from the understanding and the needs of the common people. So Shiva gave Tantra. But as I say, nowadays, people think of Tantra as something strange and mysterious. And also, unfortunately, people in the West, at least today, will think of Tantra as something to do with sexuality. And this has absolutely nothing to do with Tantra, except in a symbolic way. And we can talk about that another time. Thus, Tantra has been misunderstood and we can say abused by unknowing people or by greedy people. And Baba has clearly restated Tantra and given it for the modern world. Yoga is another example. If I tell people, I often do tell people I'm a yogic monk. They may not know what a sannyasana is. They may not know what a swami is, but they have an idea what a monk is in Europe and other places I go. But yoga, if I say I'm a yogic monk, I have to quickly explain something about what yoga is, because people nowadays think of yoga as exercises and maybe nothing more. Didi and Mahadev may recall that several years ago we attended a yoga festival. I guess it was in a big building in Paris, just outside Paris. And I recall one time Mahadev and I, one day we were there for maybe 3 days. I can't remember. One day, Mahadev and I were sitting at a table we had where we were giving leaflets and selling books and talking to people. And nearby in one of the rooms, they were kind of open rooms. there was a session of laughing yoga going on. And I recall Mahadev and I kind of smiled at each other, and I may have said something like, and nowadays everything can be yoga. And laughing is good, laughing is healthy, but to call it laughing yoga is, I think, misusing the idea of yoga. And Baba, of course, clearly re-explains yoga so that it's not just physical exercises. Another thing that Baba re-explains is jama and niyama. In the olden times, they had earlier interpretations which may have been either incorrect or not relevant to the modern world. And Baba gives the example of brahmacharya, where many older yogis, and maybe even some today, they say that brahmacharya means celibacy. But Baba clearly explains that the word Brahma has nothing to do with celibacy, and the word charya or acharya has nothing to do with celibacy. Baba also explains tapa. Tapa is to willingly undergo hardship for the benefit of others. It has nothing to do with self-punishment to make yourself more pure. That is not realistic at all. So these are just examples of how Baba has taken old teachings which have been misunderstood or perhaps never were understood properly, and he has given them in a proper way. Now, a second category of Baba's philosophy and teachings is ideas that are perhaps new or almost completely new. This might include microvita, Prabhat proud. Microvita is an idea that sometimes when I read articles on science, I see that scientists are almost touching on microvita, but not really understanding it. It might be like me reading something in French where I can maybe read the language, maybe, but I probably won't understand what I'm talking about. Baba, of course, has given clear ideas of what microvita are and how they can benefit the society. Prabhat Sangeet is not just songs and poetry, but it's, as I understand, the whole philosophy of Ananda Marga is expressed in this way through music and poetry. And Prout, of course, is something where perhaps some of the ideas have been around a little bit, but Baba has given this beautiful, wonderful, comprehensive socioeconomic philosophy. Now, another idea of Baba's, which is new, is, of course, what we're talking about today, which is neo-humanism. Now, some may know that the Indian activist and philosopher M.N. Roy, back perhaps in the 19th century or the early 20th century, had ideas which he called new humanism or even neo-humanism. But his ideas seem to be based more on a material idea, a material conception of the universe. They have little or nothing to do with what we understand as neo-humanism from Anandamurti, from Baba. So I would say that neo-humanism is one of Baba's ideas that is a new idea that will do a great deal to help the human society to become, as I said earlier, heaven on earth. Perhaps I might say, and I will say, that without neo-humanism, we can't have a great progressive society on this planet. But I'm not going to go into all these details because we only have a short time, and I'm just putting these ideas in your mind, and I hope we'll have longer discussions later and that we will understand how to put neo-humanism into action for the benefit of human society and for the benefit of all animate beings. As with all of Baba's philosophy, whether it's Prout or microvita, neo-humanism, Tantra, Jamaniyama, etc., spirituality is at the core of what Baba is teaching. Spirituality, as well as the trifarious life of humans, we are physical, mental, and spiritual. Unfortunately, people may forget the spiritual aspect of human beings. And also, there's a deep sense of universalism at the center of all of Baba's teachings. And this itself is new, you might say, revolutionary. So let's start a little bit and talk briefly about the ideas of Discourse 9, which is, as Baba called it, awakened conscience. In the first part of the discourse, Baba talks about the bondages that human beings are suffering from. And if I talk to most people about bondage, or you might even say slavery, which is another word similar to bondage, people will think of physical bondage, physical limitations. But Baba makes it clear that, as he says here, bondage is not only physical, but also psychic and spiritual. And this would probably be a new idea for uh, for many people in the world today. Um, People make decisions and choices not just about what they really need, but according to how balanced their mind is. So a person who is calm and balanced in their mind, if they go shopping in the supermarket, they'll buy, from my point of view, they'll buy vegetables and fruit and bread and whatever else they need, yogurt, milk, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, but someone whose mind is not so balanced or clear thinking, and I'm just giving a very small example when I say this, they're when they go to the supermarket, they might buy junk food and cigarettes and alcohol, and of course, hopefully, they will also buy fruits and vegetables. But they won't be able to make clear decisions without having a balanced mind and without also having the support from the general society on what is best to do. So that's just, as I said, one extremely small example, but it indicates that much of our society, and when I say society, I don't mean just France, I don't mean just Europe, but the whole world, is not based on rationality, but rather many choices, many decisions, whether personal decisions or social or political decisions, are made with very short-term thinking, perhaps greedy thinking, and they're not made. Um, the decisions that people make put themselves into bondage rather than giving themselves freedom. And Baba says here in this first paragraph, also, which you may have in front of you, if you saw that the what I sent on the WhatsApp list, um, Baba says that the root of bondage is in the mind. He also goes on in that paragraph to say that mind is independent from matter, but not altogether disassociated from matter. There is some connection between mind and matter. So if the root of bondage is in the mind, how do we take away that bondage or give liberation to people? And of course, the title of Baba's book is Liberation of Intellect, Neohumanism. So we want to have a spiritual life. We need a spiritual life on this planet if we're going to make real progress and stop ourselves from destroying the planet. But there has to be a way to transfer the spiritual love that we have, the spiritual universalism that we have. There has to be a way to transfer that to the real world. And that is through the intellect, through the mind, through the brain. And if our intellect is free, liberated, liberation and freedom are in a sense the same thing. If our intellect is free from bondage, if our intellect is free from prejudice, from narrow thinking, from hatred and fear, then with our intellect, we can make the decisions we need to make the world a real place, a great place, a better place to live. Going on now to the second paragraph, Baba says here about the five fundamental factors, but he says the material needs of human beings touch on the fringes of the spiritual world. Then he talks about psychic diseases may create an unhealthy situation. And then he says, what I want to comment on now is that take, for instance, those for whom religion is stock in trade. And then what more Baba says here, he says, they may do many things that may seriously jeopardize the entire spiritual world. This is a big comment, it raises a big question in just a few of Baba's words. How can religious people, so-called religious people, jeopardize the entire spiritual world? I'm going to just make a couple of comments on that. I can't dream to answer the entire comment that Baba made. Maybe others have something to add before the end of our discussion here. But I recall when I read this paragraph about religion, stock, and trade, and how the religious mercenaries, I might say, do many things that may seriously jeopardize the entire spiritual world. I recall a friend of mine named Brian here in London. I taught him meditation years ago. He had originally gone to a lecture on Prout that Dada gave. This is years and years ago. Dada told him about us, and he came here, and he came to some of my classes. I eventually initiated him. Brian, this may not be important, but Brian was a theater director, a movie director, and he taught at the best drama school in London, in England, for many years. And I occasionally meet actors who were students of his, and they have the highest respect for him. So and from what I know, he's a very intelligent man, a very moral man. He'll help anyone. He's very good-hearted, and he's an atheist. And I've met a number of other people like Brian, maybe not exactly like Brian, of course, but people who are good-hearted people, moral people, intelligent people, but they're atheists. And when I talked to Brian about this, why he's an atheist, I don't remember the exact words now, but it was years ago. But I realized that for him, he became atheist simply because the model of God that was presented to him in the church was irrational. He's a bright man. He's probably been bright since the day he was born, so to speak. So when he would go to church with his family and all that and learn about these things, it was not rational what they were saying about God and about 10 Commandments, about punishment for your sins and all that. So he, like many other people I know, maybe not many, but like some other people I know who are atheists, it's not because they don't believe there's a higher or a greater consciousness, but just because the version of God that they were given in school and church, in family, etc., was irrational for the reasons I've just said, and probably for other reasons. And they saw, as a young man, Brian probably saw no other way except to believe there can't be God, because how could that God, the crazy, strange God, the God that punishes you and says that you were born with sins and all that, how could that be a real God? To finish up this story and then move on, when I was initiating Brian, or perhaps giving him first lesson later after Nama Mantra, I explained to him that we make an offering to the Guru. And as I said, as an atheist, how could he accept anything that was God, like God? And we talked a lot. We talked about this, and finally he could accept that yes, there is a greater consciousness in the universe. And with that, without labeling it as God, and of course, as I'm just saying, God for him and many other people has a bad rap because of the irrational things that are said about God or put in the name of God and the words of God. But he could accept that there was a greater consciousness in the universe. And when I say that, I realize this chapter, of course, is called Awakened Conscience. So for Brian, although I don't know what his view of God is today, I haven't seen him in a while, perhaps his consciousness was awakened enough through meditation to realize that, yes, I can connect myself with this greater consciousness. Perhaps. I hope that Brian could get that far, because I would never tell him or anyone to accept God the way it's taught in many places in the world, which is not always rational. So as far as getting back to the bondages that Bob is talking about in this discourse, this chapter of the book, Neohumanism is here partly to help us to have a balanced life on Earth, so everyone has enough food and clothing and shelter and education, etc. And in the future, there will be other basic requirements, but that's partly why Neohumanism is here. But it does work largely on the mind, or I might call it the heart, the spiritual heart of the person, of each person. So Neohumanism, in my words, more or less quoting Baba, is here to relieve people of bondages that give them a sense of living in inner hell. And going back to the religion part for a minute, because religion is an important part of the world in many parts of the world, an important part of many societies. Um, when I see that people are talking about, for example, in Christian religions, Christian denominations, that you are a born sinner and uh, God sent his son to earth to die for your sins, and other things along that line, which you guys may be more familiar with than me. Um, I'll maybe I'll look at a person who's talking like that. In London, there's many street preachers. They'll be out in public places before COVID, and now as COVID is ending. And what I see in many of them, I won't say all of them, but what I see in many of them is that I look at them and I feel that person is suffering inside. I don't mean in their body, not that they have cancer or tuberculosis, etc., but in their mind, something is suffering. And so they see the world through the way that their mind is living. Someone who is happy all the time will look at the world and perhaps see, yes, there's problems, but we all have the capacity to be happy. And someone who has got some inner hell, inner demons, will interpret the world in that way. And unfortunately, many people who came to religion over years, over centuries, have had some inner hell in their mind, which they didn't bring on themselves, but they unfortunately had to live with it. Um, so again, just to wrap up the part about bondages, is that Neo-Humanism, as well as Ananda Marga in general, is here to relieve people of these bondages that keep them thinking in a narrow way, keeping them thinking in a sad or angry way or a negative way. And that's one reason that we want to bring the practice, the ideas of Neo-Humanism to the whole world, so that people can realize, yes, I don't have to be trapped in a narrow way of thinking. I can, using Baba's words, I can liberate my mind, I can liberate my intellect, so that I feel freedom and love and happiness in the world, so that I feel I am part of a human society, a human community, not just one person alone by myself. And we don't want anyone to suffer physically, mentally, or spiritually. And the teachings of this book, Liberation of Intellect, help us to learn how we can free ourselves if need be, and free everyone from these mental bondages. The next going on a little bit, we have a short time. Baba here is in the next paragraph is talking about hypocrisy, and Didi or others may recall, but I think in Charya Charya, Baba says that one of the three greatest crimes is hypocrisy. One of the other three great crimes is crimes against women, and also crimes against Ananda Marga, which means doing bad things, whether you're robbing a bank or torturing people or anything. That is certainly against Ananda Marga. So hypocrisy, as I understand, is one of Baba's what Baba sees as one of the great crimes against humanity. And part of this is Baba saying in the paragraph I'm looking at. The paragraph starts, such people attempt to cover their harmful or defective sentiments under a veil of hypocrisy. And people who, as Baba says here, some people are very skilled at this, and you don't realize that they're telling you false things. You don't realize that they're telling you things that even they don't believe, but they want to cover up their weaknesses. They want to cover up their greed, their jealousy, whatever it might be. So they have learned over many, many centuries to talk in a way that confuses people, that makes people perhaps feel that, yes, you are on my side, but actually, if I can look at what you're doing in your life and look at what you're really saying, you're not on my side. But many of us have not liberated our intellect enough or gained enough rationality. Many of us have not studied enough to understand who these people are. Other places Baba may call them demons in human form. I think that's who he's referring to. People who are misguiding the human society. And there are a number of people in various professions who are misguiding the human society. At another point, perhaps when we meet in person sometime, we can discuss more easily than we can now. We can discuss more easily how these hypocrites do conceal their message so that some people believe them. Just the only thing I'll say now is that living in England, I see that when Brexit was up for a vote several years ago, the people in favor of Brexit, which is limiting England, making England weaker, and making England less universal, they were talking about how foreigners were dangerous and things like that. And this struck a chord with some people. Unfortunately, it struck a chord with a good number of people. So that these glib talking people were able to distract people from the common people from what they really wanted. Then interesting here, one thing maybe I'd never thought much about it before. Later in the paragraph, Baba talks about reactionary forces can be easily identified because they openly say what they don't want or what they do want. So this may have to do with people who are racist or also sexist against the rights of women, and other people like that. Also, Baba says they openly say what they want, so we can see that they are dangerous. So there are these two types of people who have what Baba calls harmful or defective sentiments. Some are hypocritical and they are very skilled, perhaps, at hiding what they really want, and they're very skilled at confusing the people. And others say more openly that we don't want freedom for everyone. So these are some things to understand. Now, the solution to many of these problems, Baba says, is study. In the next part, Baba says there are two ways to fight against these people who are motivated by geosentiment. One is through study, and the other is through rationalistic mentality, or rationalistic outlook. And this part is actually difficult. I'm talking to Margis and Acharyas now, so we understand that when Baba says study, he doesn't mean just memorizing a book. I gave that example earlier in this talk, but he means to, as he says here, intensive intellectual analysis. What do I mean by intensive study? These are Baba's words. Baba then goes on to say internal assimilation, subjective assimilation of objective happenings. This is difficult. These words are difficult for these concepts. To assimilate something internally means to take it inside of you and deeply understand it. It may mean, for example, that we go out of our way perhaps to feel the pain of others, to help people directly. If you see someone who's hungry, maybe you do give them food and maybe you talk to them for some time. And then you can understand more of why they are hungry. Maybe not completely, of course, but you can understand more what that person is going through. That may be partly what Baba means by internal assimilation. The next part, using Baba's word, subjective assimilation of objective happenings. I think I might know something of what that is, but you here listening may know more than I do about that. But basically, I guess it means, please correct me if you have more to add about this point. As I say as I see it, it can mean that I see what is happening in the world and I try to bring it into myself. I try to understand how it might affect me and those I love and those I'm close to. And in that way, I can start to understand the real depth of the problem. These are just some words I'm saying, and I'm not sure that I'm giving a right and accurate understanding of that phrase. But again, Baba emphasizes study. Now, I think when Baba says study, and I may be wrong, but I think when Baba says study, he doesn't mean just to pick up a book or a newspaper or look on the internet and read about something. That's useful, of course. But probably I would guess that he also means look at different points of view. And instead of accepting the popular point of view on a certain topic, it may be about a war, an invasion. It may be about foreigners coming to your country, whatever a foreigner is. And in Anandamarga, we don't see foreigner. We don't see anyone as a foreigner. We are all part of one human family. We're all part of one universal family. No one is a foreigner. No one is coming from over there in the spiritual sense. So when we study, as I say, it's not just reading about things, but perhaps I read about a problem dealing with taxes. I'm just making that up, but taxes are something that bother a lot of people. And maybe there's a newspaper I like, and I would then tend to agree with what they say about taxes. But why don't I go talk to some people who are experts in taxation, experts in economics? And maybe if I talk to a few of these people, perhaps I can understand more deeply what is the issue dealing with taxes. And I say taxes here, but it could be immigration, it could be sexual discrimination, it could be poor education, it could be crime in the area that I live. Not only do I want to read about it, as I said, but part of study, I feel, is that I need to find people who have experience of these problems. And that can help me to form a proper decision. But as well as study here, as Baba says, study to me also means I look at the personal, I look at the problem in the world. Maybe it's a world problem, maybe it's local to London or Paris or Valencia or somewhere else, and try to understand all of the aspects of the problem. And then I want to after that, I want to read Baba's book, perhaps Liberation of Intellect. Perhaps another time I want to read Guide to Human Conduct for another problem that I'm dealing with. Or I might want to read some other books on Prout, perhaps Human Society, Part 1 or Part 2, or other books. And by combining what I've learned about the problem in the society with Baba's teachings on spirituality, on society, on economics, on health, on education, etc. By combining those two sources, then I hope that I can come up with a better solution than we have so far. But I'm going to end now because it's just after 8 o'clock France time and Spain time. But I just want to summarize by saying that with the problems in the world, we need to, as I say, study the serious problem, but also understand how does neo-humanism fit into solving this problem, or how does Prout fit into solving this problem, or how does Jama and Niyama fit into solving this problem. So study the problem, know the problem deeply, talk to people, be honest about your experience with the problem also, and then see how Baba's teaching fits into solving the problem. And what I do these days is I try to some degree, not completely, but I try to some degree to understand the problem, but ignore what these people or those people are saying about the solution, because their solution, their proposal is probably limited. Baba's solutions are based on, as we know, liberating the intellect, freeing the intellect from bondages. So if an intelligent professor has a problem has a solution which will solve this much of the problem, Baba has a solution which will solve all of the problem if we can put it into action. So that's all I need to say now. But I hope when we can eventually meet in person, that we can have longer and more productive discussions on this wonderful book, this wise, very deep book and teaching. So thank you, everyone. Namaskar.